I got 10 very important CELPIP reading tips for you that you gotta understand because these will improve your marks. These are a lifesaver, starting with tip number 1 right here. You wanna skip questions. What does that mean? If you skip questions, you lose marks, right? Wait a second, let me explain. The thing you wanna avoid is sticking to the sequence of the questions, 1, 2, 3, 4. You want to start skipping questions. Basically, do the easy ones first. That'll help you solve a lot of things quicker, boost your confidence, but more importantly, it will help you with the question you're actually skipping. Here's what I mean. If you look at this question, this is part 1, question number 1. What is the primary aim of Dr. Helena's letter? And then we have obviously a letter here, which we have to read. Obviously, you will be able to answer question number 1 if you read the whole thing. And you don't need to read the whole thing just to answer number 1. Try number 2. You might find the answer right here. Number 3 might be right here. Number 4 and so on. Once you're done with all of them, come back to number 1 and answer it then. It's the wisest strategy you can apply. It'll save you time instead of you having to read everything for one question. That's not a good use of your time. Moving on to strategy number 2. You wanna not focus on saving time, which again sounds crazy, but I'll explain. Look, if you are trying to save time, for example, at the end of part 1, you're done in 8 minutes. So you got 2 extra minutes. And now you're thinking this will go to part 2 and you'll have 2 extra minutes. That's not what happens in CELPIP. Every section, parts 1, 2, 3, 4, they have their dedicated time. It is not like IELTS where you can save time on one section and carry it forward to the other. Don't save time. Spend all your time that is remaining in part 1, part 2, part 3, part 4. Saving it will never mean you can carry it to the next section, so don't even bother. Next, let's talk about the unscored item. Be prepared. And I'll tell you this because a lot of you are very surprised when this happens in reading and listening. You have 4 parts in reading. You have 6 parts in listening, supposedly. However, you can get an additional part. You might get a repeat of part 5 in listening. You might get a repeat of part 3 in reading or other parts. So you might get duplicate parts. One of those duplicate parts is called the unscored item. This is where you're not going to be marked, but unfortunately, you don't know which one it is. So CELPIP throws in these unscored items. My guess is for their survey purposes and test development. It makes the test longer, but you gotta deliver in both sections, whether it's a duplicate, whether it's not, you just don't know which one is scored. So be prepared. Don't be surprised if you get an extra section. And, just be prepared. There's no con to this. This is just one tip you need to make sure you're ready for. Now, there's an 80-20 rule and there's a 50-50 rule. Once again, we'll use the example of part 1 here. Part 1 and part 4 of your CELPIP reading test, they have 2 sections. So you have the first section with the first 5 questions. Here you are answering all of this based on the initial passage. Then in both parts 1 and 4, you have this separate section where it is a response letter or a comment by a visitor. And now you have to focus on how a person who is responding to this will be answering this section. Now, here's the important thing to understand. When you were doing the first few questions, you read the entire passage, right? If you didn't, you have a problem. You had to read everything to answer the first section in parts 1 and part 4. So if that has been done, when you go to the second section of parts 1 and 4, you don't have to and you should not be reading the passage. Of course, if it's 1 or 2 difficult questions, yeah, sure, you can go back, but mostly you don't or you should not read the passage again and again to answer these questions. These questions are based on the response, how a person would likely respond to what was already said in the passage, and you have at this point really understood the concept and almost memorized the passage. So these answers are going to be fast, which is why it makes sense for you to give that section only 20% of the time and the first section 80% of the time. Those who say we should give 50-50, it's a bad strategy. Obviously, you see 2 sections, you say it makes sense to do 50-50. That's a terrible use of your time. You will be giving less time to the first section where you actually need to spend a lot of time because you're developing your understanding. Now let's move on to our fifth tip, and that is looking for the concept, which is highly, highly important, not only because we're changing the year, but it's also important because this is what a lot of you have been missing for a long time. This is the reason many of you fail CELPIP reading. You look for keywords. You have a keyword in the question, you look for that in the passage. It's very unlikely that you would have more than 10% of those opportunities. Mostly, these things are paraphrased. So if the question says, the villagers were negative about the government, you're looking for the word negative. That can be paraphrased in 1,000 ways. In fact, they might not even say negative or upset. They might say the concept, but completely differently. They might say the villagers were complaining to the municipality. So complaining automatically should indicate to you that they were negative. And that's the part now you should focus on. But if you're just looking for a negative or those synonyms, you're going to be stuck. You will never find them. But understanding the concept, hey, I got to look for something negative, bad feeling, complaining, protesting, that's how you will hook to the passage where the answers are and follow them up with the questions. The sixth strategy is understanding your response. And the worst thing is answering it like a test. Once again, I'm referring to parts 1 and 4. And here again, we're talking about section 2. So here is where the response is coming for someone who has read this letter or passage. Now, when you try to answer it like a test, what you try to do is you look at the keywords here, which is not a bad strategy. You're looking at the keywords around the blank, going back up, trying to find the answer. However, it's very unlikely you will have those answers because this is a response. This is pretty much a new development, a new idea that's coming up. And this is a new person giving their perspective. So what you should do is when you are reading the initial passage, you should understand it as if you were the one who it was being written to. Let me show you an example here. This initial passage in part 1 was written by Helena, and it was written to Langworthy. Now, you have to assume that you are Langworthy, you're the person receiving this letter. Understand it as if this is your profession, because here you're the one writing the response letter. So if you put yourself in Langworthy's shoes, you will know exactly what most likely will be your responses to this, and this. Instead of looking at it as a test and trying to find a strategy, try to understand the response, how you would respond to a potential letter like the one you saw earlier. The next, verse 7, is skimming, and I'm kind of like okay and not okay with it. It works for some people. It does not work for everybody. That's what you got to remember. For me, it does never work in CELPIP. It works in IELTS though. In IELTS, we have lots of time and it's a long passage. In CELPIP, you have lesser time and it's a short passage. That's why skimming does not work for me, but it might work for you. So skimming is basically taking 30 seconds or 1 minute and looking at the whole thing, trying to understand the whole concept, then going to the questions. However, because of the limited time in CELPIP, even 30 seconds or 1 minute, it's too much of a waste if you're just skimming. I always tell people if you look at the questions, then go to the passage, you're already reading and it's not much, so you don't have to skim and then read. However, I've noticed that some people do better with skimming. It encourages them to know that we have a certain idea about what we're about to read, and that helps them in answering questions. It never has, in my experience, affected the accuracy of how you answer, so it's not something that is a game changer. It's just a mental thing. So if it works for you, if it helps you, go ahead and do it. If it doesn't, skip it. The next important strategy is something that is missed by a lot of teachers and a lot of students, and that is understanding the relationship in part 2, not just focusing on the picture. Here's why this is so important. Look, in part 2, you got a picture, you have a passage here, and you have to match the answers with the picture. But look at what's happening here. In the second half of this part 2, you have questions about Nigel and Nigel's last long name, I'm not going to say that. Nigel, Emma, Nigel. These people are not mentioned in the picture, but these people are mentioned here. in the initial section, they are talking, so Emma's talking to Alex, and these guys were mentioning a third person named Nigel, and they were talking about him. And this is the whole relationship. Maybe they're in an office, maybe they're a bunch of friends, whatever they are. If you're not understanding the relationship between them and a question comes up, are they friends? Are they colleagues? Or how does this person agree with that person? You won't be able to answer them. So of course, during the first section, focus on the picture, but keep in mind you're at the same time supposed to understand the relationship between people, which will ultimately help you answer the second section. All right, let's move on to our second last strategy, and that is to do with part 3. Part 3, you want to read all the questions, not just one at a time. Doing one at a time is going to be the worst thing you can do. Look, part 3 is matching paragraphs with the options over here. So this is paragraph A, this is paragraph B, and so on. If the answer for this statement was in paragraph B, I'm going to pick B for that, and so on. So it's matching. Now, if you look at the first question, which innovations improve data flow from oceanic depths? You look at this, and now you look at paragraph A, B, C, D. You're going to waste so much time. Please never ever do that. Instead, look at all questions. 1, 2, in this case, it's 1, 2, 9. You want to read all of them. You won't be able to memorize all of them because you're reading too much, but you want to focus on the keywords and the concepts. Put them in your head. Then you go to paragraph A, read it, understand it, and while you're understanding it, you will see that some keywords here match what you already read earlier, and you'll be able to quickly get the answers. Then go to B, do the same thing, go to C, do the same thing. The key for you here is to make sure you read all questions at the get-go, not one at a time. Your final strategy is having educated guesses when time is less. And the worst thing you can do is leaving blank questions at the end. When your time is running out, you have 1 minute left, make sure you select an answer for everything. Don't let there be any blank. You might think, I'm reading, I still have 1 minute. At 50 seconds, I'll fill in those blanks. A lot of you miss this. Don't do that. Just pick any answer at that point. So if you're rushing, if time runs faster than you imagined, at least you have something there. There's a 25% chance that your answer will be correct. It's 1 out of 4. That's a probability. So don't leave anything blank. Make sure you answer everything. And if the time runs out, at least you have something to submit instead of having blank answers, which are guaranteed to cause failure. So guys, make sure you follow these reading strategies in CELPIP and stop failing by focusing on these core strengths. Check out our CELPIP course in the description. Please like, share, and subscribe. Really appreciate it.